Joseph with Landscape King, the Landscape King podcast. So we have another guest today. Everyone knows who this gentleman is.
No, they don't.
And if you don't, you probably, who knows? But this
live
guy,
under a rock.
Who is this guy? Tell us who you are. What
I'm
are you
Jim
doing
Chapman. I am owner of Envision Podcast Production, and I do a bunch of podcasts. And I produce your podcast.
He's the secret sauce.
That's
Something like that.
I've definitely been called worse for sure.
Today we're going to talk about the 10 mistakes people make when installing a flower bed, and then you're just going to give us some feedback and tell us that you made all the mistakes.
I'm going to give interesting commentary during this podcast. I'm going to expand upon everything I don't know about landscaping, which is pretty much everything.
So in doing this with me so far, do you feel like you're getting more interested about landscaping? Are you starting to notice things around town?
I'll tell you what, just doing the podcast and editing it for you and sitting in here while you do what you do, I definitely have learned a lot more than you think you know things, and then you find out the truth and you're like, wow. Everything from how often you should water your plants.
Right.
You recommend every 3 days or so for most. Who knew? I didn't know that. So now I actually pay attention to when it's going to rain. And if it says it ain't going to rain for 5 days, I put it in my brain. Maybe I need to, well, in my case, maybe I need to ask my wife to water the plants because I'm not the best at doing that. But I would have never known that had I not produced what you do.
Are you starting to notice what type, or are you starting to be able to identify plants now too?
Man, I know ligustrums and
philodendrons
and roses and all kinds of things now that I didn't know. I can't pronounce half of them, but I'm aware of them anyway.
Well, let's get into it. So number one, the biggest mistake I see is spacing. Either people put plants way too close together or way too far away. And then in doing that, if your bed is very sparse, it just looks naked. Sometimes people will put things way too close to the house, like we talked about one time. Didn't you say you had something that was planted like right up on that? It was a magnolia or a crepe myrtle or something?
Yeah, one of them. And I've even had situations where when we laid our mulch, we had our mulch butted up against our brick initially, and the termite guy flipped out and he said, no, you can't put it right on. Yeah, he's like, I can't. So to ensure for termite protection, they won't do it if that mulch is right on that brick, because termites that's how they get in the house. They got to be touching whatever it is. So I leave a gap now between the brick of the house and the mulch.
And we'll do that a lot too. And that's well, hey, you're getting ahead. That's one of our other mistakes people make too. But
see, I have been learning.
You have been learning. Well, that's another thing too. You always want separation between the foundation of the house and then the bed. And so what we'll normally do is oftentimes we'll put like a metal edging, and then we'll put either limestone or egg rock, just some sort of rock to separate the foundation in the flower bed.
Right.
But number two mistake I see all the time is people don't consider sunlight whenever they pick plants. And they just pick what looks nice in the nursery.
That's true, yeah.
And so then people will end up planting, like if you plant that philodendron in full sun, it doesn't do as well as it would in a shadier spot.
Which you talked about on your last podcast, 10 best Baton Rouge plants for shade or something like that. No,
That's right.
I forget the exact title. But yeah, so go check that out if you missed it, folks. It's pretty good.
I'd say number three, we're just going to keep going down through these and then continue to tell us all the mistakes or things you've made.
Well, let's not go to number three just yet, because on number two, we talked about shade and how people make that mistake. I absolutely would make that mistake because I don't know. You could hand me a plant right now and you would say, here, I'm going to give this to you. And I would go to my house and just think, where would this look best, or where do I have room for it? Never would I think to research shade versus sunlight. Now, if you're someone that plays in the garden all the time, I'm sure you know, but if you're, I would say my side of the population, you would have no idea, which is, what would happen, Joseph, if someone planted something in sunlight that really perform better in shade? Would it just completely die?
On a lot of things, yeah, it would. Like,
wow.
One example is just like a normal hydrangea would start just melting, basically. Same with like dwarf monkey grass. Eventually, the things just don't perform well. And the inverse, if somebody plants something that prefers full sun and all shade, it might not bloom as much.
Oh.
Or it might even change color. There's some plants that if you put them, like purple fountain grass, if you put purple fountain grass in a shady spot, it's going to start losing that purple to it. And same with the sunshine ligustrum. If you put something like that in a shady spot, it starts losing. And sunshine ligustrum has a yellow leaf. It starts losing that color a little bit the more shade it gets.
Interesting.
And so
it's important in that.
It is important. And then for most things, if they prefer shade and you put them in sun, they're just not going to perform well. If you put things in sun that like sun and shade, they might not bloom as much. They might change color. They might still make it, but they're just not going to look the best that they could look.
Got you. I got you.
But it is important to know. And one of the next things, I've got it all right here. So number 3, we've got watering. Sometimes people are going to...
What we just talked about.
What we just talked about.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are going to water too much or they're not going to water at all.
How do you know when it's too much? Is there a trick to that?
So sometimes...
I mean, if the mulch is floating, is that...
yeah.
That would be one indication?
If it's just floating away, exactly.
Okay.
And oftentimes we'll just put in like a little micro, especially for a flower bed, we'll just put in like a little micro irrigation system. It just has a digital timer, hooks up to the faucet, and then runs through the beds.
Well, interesting thing here at the studio.
Yeah.
Of course, if you pass by the studio, folks, Landscape King did do all my landscaping outside. I was watering it just probably 3 or 4 days ago, and I didn't know how long to stand there and water. I just gave it a good soaking.
Yeah.
But is there like a way, or is it just feel? You just kind of...
It's kind of both. I mean, you could get out there and measure it of how much water you're actually putting in like in a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
But most of the time when like for my house, for example, sometimes I'll count 15, 20 seconds for a plant, but most of the time it's just, you just want to make sure that it's soaked. What you can do is just pull the mulch aside, put your finger in the soil and make sure that it feels moist.
Right.
Maybe not muddy, but just moist. Make sure it's not dry.
Yeah, because the interesting thing is, especially with my landscape out here, when it rains, I can't control how much water it's getting.
Yeah,
it's just going to get what it gets, right? So that's kind of what I did. I just made sure I could see that it was seeping into the soil and then backed off.
And I'd say the only way people overwater is when they leave the sprinkler on for like 10 hours.
Yeah, I did that before.
Oh, really?
The next day I went to work and my whole yard, I woke up and walked outside. My whole yard was like a lake, man. It was
just completely muddy.
Yeah, it was. You would have thought it was. We don't talk about flood around here, but it was pretty. It was pretty wet. I mean, it was a good 10 hours of watering.
Well, it's definitely more common to see people overwatering their lawn, and if you start overwatering the lawn consistently, you'll start getting certain weeds that indicate that the yard is staying too wet. Like you'll start seeing dollar weed. There's another little grassy weed called Kalingia. You'll start seeing that.
I got a great question on weeds too. If that's not one of the
well, let's keep going. What's your question?
So, and this actually occurred this weekend. Cutting the grass, and my wife made the comment. She's like, "Man, we got so many weeds in the grass this year. It's like half weeds, you know." She said we need a weed and feed. And I said, well, do we do it before or after I mow? Like, so if I weed and, because we got the spreader. So if I do that and then I cut the grass prior to that, is that the way it should be done? Or should I cut the grass, wait a couple days and then weed and feed?
That would probably be better. It'd probably be better to cut it, let the weeds start emerging a little bit, and then do it.
Okay.
And it's always better to use a selective herbicide to kill the weeds first and then fertilize instead of doing the weed and feed at the same time.
Really?
It's better to kill the weeds first, then you want to fertilize. Because the idea is that if you're fertilizing at the same time, you could just be giving more nutrients to the weeds, and then they could just take over the lawn even more.
I got you.
So that happens a lot too. Now you don't want you don't want it to be too high. So it's definitely good to mow it.
Yeah.
Let those weeds start emerging and then spray that with the selective herbicide. And a lot of people have a lot of clover right now.
Oh, you got a ton of that. Yeah.
Tons of clover, dollar weed.
Yeah.
Which if you have a spot that holds water, you'll get a lot of that.
Yeah.
But you definitely want to kill it first.
Okay.
Then fertilize. And there's a company we recommend people to in town called Grassroots. They do a great job. And they'll come in. They just focus on treatments, and that's all they do.
Didn't know that exists. That's interesting.
So have you done the? So you're saying you haven't done anything yet, huh?
I haven't. No, because Joseph,
somebody.
I don't know, but actually, I was out there cutting the grass, and I want to say she went on Google and just Googled when is best time to weed and feed, and they had said you have to wait a few days after you cut is really the best time. So we didn't do it. Long story short, we just moved on to other things, but planned on doing it possibly this weekend.
And that's because that it's good because that's when the weeds are emerging, and that's whenever you can get rid of them.
Yeah, because it seems like sometimes they'll take over, choke out your grass, man.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when you spray to kill the weeds, you won't have any grass left.
Right.
So sometimes when the weeds are so bad, it's almost better to, instead of killing them, just to start over and just take everything out, regrade and reside.
Yeah,
we've done that for people.
I got like an acre. I wouldn't want to do that. I'd have to find another job, Joseph. I'd have to get a part-time job.
Maybe so.
Expensive.
Maybe so. So moving right along. So number 4, and this is kind of like with number 1.
Yeah.
People don't research the plants before they plant them. And so we talked about planting things that are going to require shade, but they get too much sunlight. Another thing that people don't consider is how big things are going to get. And so sometimes people will see something like a 1-gallon container, they'll plant it, and it kind of goes back with spacing, but then they'll plant it right up next to the house, and then it gets massive, and then it takes over. Yeah. You've never done that, right?
No, not at all. Never
you always know exactly how big everything's going to get up.
That's right.
But there is a tendency when you see something nice, especially at the nursery when it's blooming, to just want to get that, but you may not know how it does in our climate either. And that's sometimes, especially at Lowe's and Home Depot, they'll have things there that look really nice in the store, but don't really perform well.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're saying be intentional with what you're planning.
Yeah.
I can use an example of, and I can't take credit for this, my wife can, but we had a window that the sun at 4:00 in the afternoon when the sun's going down, it just hit that window, and it didn't matter what we had the air conditioner on. It didn't matter what we had in front of that window. It got hot in the house. I mean, that sun just sitting there baking. And so she intentionally planted a plant. I think it was a philodendron.
They got kind of big, and
this one, it covered the whole window, and it's beautiful and it looks good where it's at. But her whole intention was, I want to put a plant here that's going to be big enough to block the sun from getting, into that window, so making it so hot in that particular room.
And it seemed to help.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you can tell a difference. Winter times around here, when that plant dies and comes back. In the wintertime, around here, it could be 80 degrees sometimes in December. And so you'll notice it'll get a little warm in there because the plant has died and there's no leaves to hide the sun. So, yeah, it definitely works in the summertime when that thing's beautiful and bloomed or whatever. You don't have that problem.
But that brings up a good point, too, of knowing if things are going to live all year long or if they're not going to.
Absolutely.
And so being able to research it, or even just like asking a professional of like, hey, I mean, you can ask Google everything.
Yeah, but Google's not always right either.
Probably most of the time it's close enough. But so it's good to know, because sometimes people will plant things in a spot and they don't realize it's a perennial or that it's an annual and that it's not coming back.
Right.
And then they feel like they have to start over.
That's right.
So the next thing we have is, this is kind of a preference, but I think people make a mistake. Number 6, they make a mistake by not installing landscape lighting. So investing a ton of money on a landscape and not investing in landscape lighting, in my opinion, is a mistake. I know that we've talked about lighting a little bit, but the low voltage LED landscape lighting, it is more expensive than solar lights, but it has such a huge difference on a property, especially if you have a lot of trees, especially highlighting features of your home. Have you ever driven by a house at night and see the lights?
Oh yeah, I used to have landscape lighting all in my front area, but it was kind of at the onset of solar lighting for landscaping.
Oh yeah.
So it was not the best. Like at night, you're expecting this Walt Disney World display right in your front yard, and the lights are bare. They're so dim you can barely see. Yeah. Now technology has come a long way in the last 20 years. I mean, that was probably 20 years ago, and after the flood, of course, all that was ruined. So I never went back to it, but probably. I definitely agree that it not only is it good, but it spruces up it just makes it look nice. I mean, people have it now where they have downlights all around their house, just focusing on certain corners of their house, and
exactly.
And so your landscape kind of the same way.
Yeah, and now we primarily use just low voltage LED landscape lighting. Like we don't. I always tell people that that's just way better than solar, because you're gonna have to replace the solar eventually.
Yeah.
And then the cost that it takes to replace the solar is just as much as it would have been just to install the low voltage LED landscape lighting from the beginning.
Yeah, and it's hard with solar to really judge too exactly how bright it's going to be. I had a friend that put a flagpole in his front yard. He's a Marine recruiter, and he's my across the street neighbor. And beautiful flagpole he got off of Amazon or something, and way tall, and at the top of it, it has a solar deal that lights up the whole top. Nice. But it's nice, but it's not as bright as you want it to be. As a matter of fact, he had bought some other solar lights separate for the bottom of it to kind of shine up, because it wasn't as bright as you would like it to be. So I'm sure low voltage lighting that is electric is going to give you a lot more accurate picture.
It does, and most of the fixtures we use have a lifetime warranty on them too.
Oh, really?
They have a lifetime warranty, and the bulbs have 2-year warranties.
Wow, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. All right, so number 7 is people install a flower bed and they won't do any kind of bed prep. They won't till the soil. I've seen sometimes where people literally just take plants and stick them in the ground in front of the house, and then they'll maybe throw a little mulch around that. And the issue with that is, one, if you don't build the bed up, you have water that ends up sitting and could flood the plants. The plants could have root rot because there's water sitting there. You've got to do some sort of bed prep, whether you're tilling, amending, or just building the beds up. We always recommend just building the beds up, because most plants are going to need that well-drained soil.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a house like that where they just kind of threw things in the ground and it definitely wasn't prepped right?
I've seen some rough-looking landscapes, and honestly, in ours, we've always built the beds up, and we're real good about springtime going to Clegg's or somewhere and getting new mulch and rebuilding those beds.
Yeah.
So but I have seen situations where it's like the mulch is like an inch tall, and they're like putting plants in there and just spreading mulch around the
And at that point you might be saving a little money, but it's just not accomplishing the goal. Like making a big
plant's going to struggle to prosper, I would imagine.
The whole time, exactly. So number 8, I see sometimes people will build up a flower bed and not consider drainage and not consider where the water's going to go whenever it rains. And so sometimes, and we've talked about this before as well, when you install gutters, it doesn't completely fix your drainage issue. Then you have your downspout, so you have to make sure that we're rerouting that downspout So sometimes I've seen people build up a flower bed. They do the bed prep right, but then they even leave a gap behind the bed, but they don't have anywhere for the water to go when it rains. So they trap that water in there, and then that water ends up going into the house, flooding the house, or worse, it ends up just flooding the plants as well. Yeah. And this is oftentimes too, people will build the beds up, which is good to build the bed up. We just want to make sure we do it away from the house. Sometimes I've seen people build it up and put too much mulch up onto the house too, which then leads into termites as well, which is said.
That's a big deal. That's I know a lot of pest control guys, and all of them say that when there's termite problems, 99% of the time they've either got a plant that, or don't ask me to name the name, but some sort of plant that, say, it grew to the size where it's touching their eave,
right? And
termites will get in that way, or it'll be that flower bed where the mulch, they're just eating that wood and they get in. Because the mulch is butted against the house. But you bring up a good point with the gutter systems, and I'll tell you what, I don't have a gutter system on my house. It's just drip edges.
Right.
So the problem with that is in my gardens in the front, you can see where it drips because it indents.
Right.
So it's got a big indentation. I don't really have a drainage problem because fortunately my front yard slopes.
That's good.
So I've got a good slope there that makes that water go away. But you can see an indentation. You could pick out exactly where it comes off that house because it's all the way across in an exact line from the roof line, Yeah.
And what sometimes people will do, sometimes they'll put rock underneath.
That's what we did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We put decorative rock all right there on that line. That helps a lot with it.
And another thing
probably need a gutter system would be the way to go. If you're in Louisiana and you don't have a gutter system, that to me is just crazy because gutter systems not only help in landscape, they help in paint.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, man, because all the houses now, the brick is getting painted. And it looks beautiful.
Yeah, it does.
My house's brick is painted. The problem is it rains a lot here.
Right.
So what happens is if you don't have a gutter system, that drip edge, that water hits that brick. Wind-driven rain hits that brick, and it'll work its way. That water will actually work its way behind the paint film, and it'll pull it off of that brick because brick is not really meant to be painted. It's just kind of like somebody painted it and it stuck, and they were like, wow, this is cool. And you can paint it. Look, you couldn't take an M16 and get the paint off my brick. And now I was a paint guy back in the day, so I overdid it, right? And I had the access to the best products. But if someone has a gutter system, it works all that water away from that brick, all that water away from that landscape to where they don't have to worry about indentions or, in my case, with paint, worry about it getting behind your paint film and popping your paint off.
What color did you end up going with?
I went with it's like a light, very, very light cream, almost white.
Nice.
Just a little hair of a cream to it. Really I didn't want it so white it was just too bright. So it's got a little hair of a cream to it. It's a beautiful color. Very popular color. I can't remember off the top of my head the name, but worked well for me. Nice. I can remember the formula though, which is
I bet you can, huh?
I can C2 yellow oxide 2 drops. For anybody that
these paint nerds in here, get out of here. So number 9 is the number 9 mistake I see when people install a flower bed is they don't do any kind of weed prevention. And what we found that works the best is using pre-emergent. And it's just a granular that we mixed into the soil, and we also sprinkle it on the top as well. Some people will use a weed fabric, and they'll put that, and then they'll cut the holes out, and they'll have the plants go in there. What I found is that once we put that mulch on top of that weed fabric, that the weeds still kept coming up through that.
And it's such a pain, man. That weed fabric is no fun.
No, it's not. Now, we'll use this, like we talked about putting that rock on the backside of the bed. We'll use that in that case, because I'm not seeing weeds grow through rock.
Right.
But it's still, you've got to just have a plan of how you're going to combat the weeds.
What about, I know people that use garbage bags versus weed fabric.
You just have to make sure
it's cheaper, I guess. But
it is, but you just have to like poke holes through it to make sure water can filter through it.
Okay, yeah.
Because if not, then the water's just
sitting on top.
Yeah.
Rotting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got you.
Now for like if you're just putting rock in, I guess that'd be okay. But the worst part about installing a flower bed is you have this beautiful bed, and then if you have weeds coming in the next few days or next few weeks, it's just it just takes over very quickly. And so that's why we always use a pre-emergent. And we did in your beds as well. Have you had any weeds come up yet?
I haven't seen any.
I think it's been a few weeks.
It's been a good month and a half or so.
Yeah. So you got to experience it firsthand.
Mm-hmm. It looks great. Everything's coming in nicely. It was good selections for that particular landscape and all of that. So yeah, y'all did a great job. And your guys that you have working for you, very professional, cleaned up after themselves and all of that. So great work all around. No complaints.
Yeah, it came out nice. The last number 10, the last thing that I see people make a mistake with is they don't answer the objective that they want. That they don't answer what they're trying to solve. And a lot of times, if your objective is to have curb appeal, it's going to affect the kind of plants that you put in. If your objective is, hey, I just want to sell this house, I want it to look very minimal, then that's fine too. But knowing what your objective is with the installation is going to affect the plants you use, how many you use, and it's going to affect. I think you'll be more satisfied with the end result if you can clearly identify what your objective is from the jump.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And especially if you're looking for curb appeal, you're probably looking for a little more color than if you're just looking to, like you say, get a house ready for sale and you want it to look nice, but you don't want to invest a ton of money in it. Maybe you just want a couple bushes or something like that look nice. But color for me, obviously, with what I did for many, many years, color for me has always been a thing. And I like color and landscape. I like things that pop. Roses come to mind just because they come in many different colors, but I don't like thorns that roses come with. Man, them thorns will get you. We used to have a rose bush.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. We had one at the house that was
serious?
rather large. We lost that in the flood, but that was the one thing I hated was them thorns, man.
So how did everything fare after the flood? So in 2016, obviously we had a big flood in surrounding Baton Rouge areas, in Denham Springs, Livingston Parish. And so how much water did you get, and how much of your landscape was buried with that?
Well, as a parish, it was actually 31 inches of rain, 7 trillion gallons of water in just 2 days. We literally got what we get in a year in 2 days' time here in Livingston Parish, Louisiana, and a little bit of Baton Rouge, the kind of the outer O'Neill Lane area, Baton Rouge, if you're local. It was horrible. My house in particular, my street, we had almost 6 feet of water in every house, and I live on a residential street with probably 100 houses in it or so. I don't know, but all of us, up to the roofs, and the landscapes did not fare well. Everybody's landscape was annihilated. Strangely enough, there were a few plants that lived through it.
Like what? What were some of the things that lived?
The plant I was telling you about that shaded the window made it through. Nice. I had a magnolia tree that made it through, which it's giving me some problems now. My wife mentioned she thinks it's dying, but it's huge. I mean, it's a big tree. I didn't know magnolia trees got that big. Yeah, but thankfully it's in the center of my front yard, so it's not close to anything, and but it's looking rough lately. We can't figure it out.
Well, that is kind of side note there. I've noticed a lot of magnolias. I don't know if it was the drought and the heat from last summer, but a lot of magnolias are starting to die. Yeah, they're just slowly starting to drop their leaves.
Hate to see that, because that was a tree we planted when we bought that house. So that was our kind of first tree that we put in, and that was 25 years ago. So I hate to see it if it
And it survived the flood.
And it survived the flood, man. And I had one particular plant, don't ask me what it was, but funny story, we started to kind of hate that plant because we planted it in the wrong spot, Joseph, just like you were talking about earlier.
Do the research, huh?
And it got way too big for the corner of our house, and we would constantly have to prune it back. Constantly. I mean, this sucker grew. And my wife is like, we just need to pull that thing out of the ground. Like, whatever we got to do. When I started looking at it, the roots, I think, have kind of grown underneath the house. I didn't want to take the chance of messing up my foundation.
Oh, gotcha.
So I just kind of left it because there's pipes under there too, folks, that you got to keep in mind. You go chain a big bush or something to your truck and pull it out. You might yank a water pipe out with it. So we basically just cut it as low as we could. That sucker came back.
But then you said you don't remember what it was, huh?
I don't know, but it's a Terminator tree. That's what I call it.
It just doesn't.
Can't kill it.
Doesn't quit.
Can't kill it. It doesn't quit. And so it's kind of grown on us now, I guess, literally and figuratively. But long story short, landscapes didn't really fare well. Most of them drowned. I mean, that water sat stagnant for a week after. It didn't even drain out. So you have feet of water down subdivisions for a week straight. That's going to drown a plant, kill it.
Yeah, talk about overwatering.
Oh, shit. And the spiders, man. People don't realize how many spiders live in their grass.
Oh, so the spiders started just
millions.
Coming out? Really?
Floated.
Wow.
Dude, that was the biggest, craziest part of the flood was, folks, for those of you that are out there, may not be familiar, I know most of you are. When it flooded, it was something that happened with no notice. You went to work that day, and then basically you were leaving work early because all the streets were flooding, and the next thing you know, you got 6 feet of water in your house. So people were in their house, and by the time they figured we got to get out of here, they couldn't take their car. Their car was inundated. So everybody just kind of walked out in chest deep water or waist deep water. When we were doing that with all of our neighbors and, 6,000 other people, you were pushing spiders out of the way. There was millions of spiders floating on this just nasty water, muddy looking water. And you couldn't see the water for the spiders. And that's how many millions of spiders live in your grass that you don't even know, just brown spiders.
Did you see any other insects, or is it just mostly spiders?
I saw a couple snakes.
Just
slithering. They didn't get close to me, or I didn't notice them getting close to anybody else, but I did see them off in the distance. But the spiders were what stood out. They were everywhere, man. And anybody you talk about that walked out in that water from their house, no matter where it's located, no matter what part of Livingston Parish, that's the first thing they say, the spiders. Everywhere, dude.
It's such a weird thing that you wouldn't think there would be that many spiders out and about.
Yes.
So
they can't swim, so they just float.
That's right.
They just float.
That's what it was.
They were floating on top of the water. It's nuts. Yeah.
And so after the flood, did you notice weeds in your yard that you'd never had before?
Yes, I did.
And any kind of other random plants just started popping up?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there were some weird like sunflowers popping up in the middle of my backyard where I never planted sunflowers, kind of thing.
Some seeds that kind of just
floated, and not only that, Joseph. One other thing that flood did, it changed the whole topography of the land. So what you got to think about is this is so much water in these subdivisions that it weighed the dirt down. So houses that had just beautiful front yards that the ground was exactly even would have almost divots in it.
Wow.
Imagine at the beach when the waves come in.
Yeah, exactly.
Similar thing. You would have, I remember cutting the grass and my lawnmower was just bouncing up and down the whole time because the whole topography of the land. I mean, my yard slopes more now than it ever did because it's silt. I mean,
time
it just
to
took it away.
Regrade it, and you need to get rid of those weeds too, huh?
I know it. You go over there and poke fun at me. Man, you got all these holes in your yard.
What is this, man? Yeah, so you brought up another thing too that's a mistake that people don't think about. With a flower bed or any kind of installation, you really especially a irrigation installation, anytime you're digging a lot in your yard, you should call 811 and get lines marked.
No doubt.
Whether it's a water line,
Cable line,
gas line, and another thing too.
and that happens a lot, especially when people are putting in fences.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Fences are the worst.
Anytime you're digging in the ground, you're bound to hit something. And out of all of these mistakes, we've made all of them. We've definitely made this one where things are supposed to be, like a gas line's supposed to be more than a foot in the ground.
Yeah.
And I don't know the exact code of what it's supposed to be, but we've been just digging to plant like a small 1 gallon plant, and we hit a gas line one time because it was so high up.
That'll make you have a heart attack.
Yeah, it will. And so being a homeowner, or if you're having work done in your house, it is good that you get these things marked.
Yeah, really. I had a neighbor who put it, most people put in their own fence.
Right.
If they have any sort of mechanical aptitude. And my neighbor was putting in his. And one day I come home, and my wife's like, "Did you pay the cable bill?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I paid the cable bill." And then I'm thinking, did I pay the cable bill? So I went and looked, and sure enough, I had paid it, but the cable was out. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. I looked on the app, and it said there was no problems in our area. And then I happened to go outside, and there's my neighbor with his post hole digger, and one of his posts it's right by the green box, so, but he had it marked and still hit it. He did call Dottie before he dug or whatever and had them come mark it, but they must have missed it or had the wrong marking, and sure enough, he cut my cable line.
Oh, man. Did he cut his as well?
I don't know. I don't know if his was affected or not, but definitely cut mine. And that's why my cable was out. And so it's very important. I was actually digging a hole for a flagpole in my backyard recently and hit a line, an old cable line though. They had run new cable lines. It didn't hurt anything, but it wasn't even that deep. No. It was maybe 6 inches in the ground or something. It was, so you got to be careful with that. Yeah, exactly. I don't have gas in my area.
Really?
I don't. We don't have gas lines where I live, but I would definitely mark if you got gas of any sort.
Do you notice anyone in your street or in your area that has an irrigation system?
Yeah. Oh yeah. My neighbor 2 houses down from me,
like in the lawn.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He is
a master gardener.
He's a master gardener. That dude, I'm not kidding you, Joseph. I will see him every morning. And this might be a little bit crazy. I hope he's not listening. But he will take his, I guess it's weed killer, and hit individual weeds in his front yard. I'm talking individual. I'm talking he's almost on his hands and knees zapping one weed.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, that's too much
time on his
Too
hand.
Much, man. Yeah. Well, at least retired. He ain't got nothing better to do, but his yard is immaculate. I mean, and he has the little sprinklers and
that pop up
all that stuff. Yeah. And so my wife always compares our yard to his, and I can ask John, and what's his name? John. I'm like, I'm gonna ask Landscape King.
That's right.
We don't need John.
We don't need John anymore.
John gonna tell you to spray one weed.
So what else?
He's a good dude.
That's good. What else are you noticing now that you're hearing more about landscaping? Like, are you like you said earlier, you're like going home and you're thinking, hey, I've got this in the right spot over here. Mm-hmm. What else? Have you started to see value in landscaping?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Let me tell you what I like about landscaping.
Tell me.
And Joseph's never seen my house or my backyard or front yard, but I have a rather large backyard, and I have a pretty good sized front yard, and I have a wife that loves being in a garden, thankfully, because I'm not a huge fan of it. That's just not my thing. But I love enjoying it and seeing it. And let me tell you, we have a little backyard courtyard area where we have this big angel that is set up, concrete angel, probably 6 feet tall.
Nice.
And we have, a place to sit out there. And we have a lot of, I don't know what you'd call them in the landscape, trinkets, I guess. We've got big antiques out there, antique wheels and antique tillers and stuff that are in the garden placed in different areas that she does such a good job of. But I like going and sitting out there and just enjoying that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like having a chill 5 minutes, which is about all I get. But at 7 o'clock at night, where I'm sitting back there, and it's like a little courtyard area, and I got my statues everywhere, and this nice greenery, and that's a big deal. That is almost therapeutic, I would say.
Well, landscape can evoke emotion.
Yeah,
like it does. It can make you feel a certain way, and it can be very enjoyable.
That's a relaxing place for me.
The setting,
I guess you could say,
because of the landscape.
Yes, yeah. Very relaxing, and my wife especially has done a good job of putting things out there that we both enjoy, like these antique trinkets and stuff like that. It's actually pretty cool. We got big wagon wheels out there. And
how much of that did you have to replace after the flood?
None, because it was my mother-in-law's at that time. A lot of it. The statue stuff, I had a lot. Like I've got a Mary statue in our front yard that's shorter. It's probably a couple of feet tall. That made it through because it weighs like 1,000 pounds. And I've got a frog, believe it or not, that has a big wide open mouth, and you can put a plant if you want to, but we don't. And it's in the front yard, and that thing, I don't know what it weighs, but it took me and another guy to move it, and we could barely move it. And look, y'all, I may be almost 50, but I got some strength behind me now. Me and my buddy, who also has some strength behind him, we were struggling with it. But that sucker could go in, underneath 200 freaking inches of water and not move. It's just a big stone.
Just solid, yeah.
Yeah, it's solid, carved out of actual stone. So those things made it through. But we had a lot of trinkets that were ours before 2016. It just floated away. Floating was, I had 20 garbage cans pushed up against my backyard fence where the water dropped just enough to catch them. Yeah. Yeah, I was like, golly, all these garbage cans. And I found people's stuff that I guess the water eventually receded to the point where it just floated, and then in my backyard is where it settled. I don't know whose it was, but it was, all kinds of stuff.
And then when plants died after that, basically, when plants died after that, did it take a few weeks, months, or did you notice like in a few years that things just never performed well again after being completely submerged underwater?
I really knew it was kind of over for them after the next season, I guess you could say. The next summer, I gave it to that point, and I'm like, yeah, this ain't coming back. But even the yards were ruined. The lawns. Look, one thing that people forget, after that flood, you had basically how it worked was you had to gut your house, and everything went in your front yard. And then this big truck would come with an attachment. It would pick your stuff up and put it in that truck. Well, y'all, you're talking about mountains of trash. People's lives in the front. It looked like Kosovo. When you would drive down a street, it was like 5 foot high mountains of everything everybody owned in their front yard. Imagine that. But when all that was picked up, this took months. This didn't happen. It wasn't like the next day.
No,
this took months. So everything underneath that was dead. All the grass was dead, and then it was jacked up because to get it out there, you're running wheelbarrows over your front yard.
Uneven and bumpy and
yeah. It was half of my front yard, and my front yard is pretty wide. Half of my front yard was gone, and it was just we had to get a lot of dirt in there just to try to regrade it, and we never regraded it fully. I mean, it was just, but the grass did come back.
Oh, it
took a good 3 years for it to come back to where now, when I cut my grass, you would never know, that there was a flood there. But it took that long.
It's mostly green now. It might have some weeds in it, but it's
and
green.
There's some spots. It's interesting. Some of my backyard will have little dead spots. I noticed that the other day when I was cutting the grass, like where it's just dirt.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened in that area, but.
Yeah, it's such a big experiment of how the landscape fared after all of that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it was something that unless you experienced it, you can't even imagine. It's just so many things all at one time. and it showed the strength of the community. The community, especially in Livingston Parish, to come back from that.
Yeah.
Most towns or most cities would have folded. I mean, the business would be gone. We came back and very proud of that for sure. Yeah.
Very good. From landscaping to floods.
That's it. That's it. Look, and I don't think you had your business back then, but if you would have, you would have.
No,
you'd have been rolling.
We actually, it wasn't official at that point, but I was doing stuff on the side. But
like side hustle at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure you had all the work you wanted at that, with
people
all
just
of that.
Like you said, their yards were completely gone.
Or
the landscapes were completely messed up.
Yeah. And the sad thing about all that is versus homeowners insurance is when you use homeowners insurance, that'll cover your landscape. So if there's a hurricane, for example, and of course with hurricanes that's a tack on. So you have a hurricane insurance is kind of like a tack on to homeowners. When there's a hurricane, you pay a different deductible, but if your landscape is damaged, you lose a tree or something like that, they pay. You can get money for a new landscape. Like they'll replace it. That's
wow.
At least they do at State Farm.
Yeah, at least they did.
Who I have, because that's on my policy. I mean, they have a deductible on it, and there's a max, but I think it's up to $1,000 or something. They'll do or something like that for your landscape. I had a tree fall after the last hurricane, huge tree. Man, when I tell you the leaves hit my house, that's how close it came. But it didn't hit it. And I was sleeping in that room. But that, I mean, you're talking a 75-foot tree, just pow. And they paid, my insurance fortunately paid to have that cut up and hauled off. So that was part of my homeowners.
And so they didn't give you money to replace it, huh?
No, not to replace it.
But to just have it removed. Yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't really part of my landscape. That was, my tree backs up to woods.
Okay.
So it was one of the trees from the woods that was on my property line that had fell. So they paid to cut that up and haul it off. But had I had, one of my philodendrons blown off or just snapped in half or something, they would have paid to, yeah, absolutely. Part of
I did not know that.
Yeah, but they don't do it with flood.
Well,
they'll do it with homeowners, but flood insurance is a whole different deal. They won't replace your landscapes. It's a racket, I think.
I mean, that makes sense though.
Yeah, I guess.
Would have been a lot of.
Well, man, you pay so much now for flood insurance. It's like, it's crazy. Flood insurance is expensive.
Did that go up after the flood?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mine has went up 5-fold.
Oh my goodness!
I paid 5 times what I paid before the flood.
Are you in a flood zone?
Yeah, but I was before that. Even though my house had never flooded or never come close to flooding ever, and it was built in the 70s, I was technically in a flood zone. But my flood insurance was like $1,300 a year. Now it's over $5,000.
Oh my God!
Yeah, same house, but. Because I flooded, it became more of a risk. Even though I live, y'all, nowhere near a river. Amy River is like 7 miles from my house. I mean, it's not anywhere. It's not like I'm butted up against it. And, so hopefully they'll get control of those rates because that will put people out of a home. I mean,
that's outrageous.
I was very blessed and fortunate I can afford that. There's some people that, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year.
Right.
Can't afford that house no more. A lot of people.
Well, and then speaking about wasting money to tying this back in, landscaping, if you make these 10 mistakes, you can end up wasting money, especially if you plant something way too close to the house and then you have to pay to get it removed later on.
Right.
But that just about wraps it up. Did you have any other questions you want to know about landscaping?
I'll save them for next time.
Next time.
I always have landscape questions.
Thank you for being on.
It was fun, man. It was fun.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Hopefully, the people got something out of this podcast that they can use in their own landscape.
Maybe so.
That's my hopes.
Another wrap of the Landscape King podcast. Join us next time, and remember, let's plant some plants.